What is going on, Michigan fans? It is Andrew from the StepBrothersPodcast. As you can see, I'm not where I normally record, and I do not have my co-host Wesley Clark with me today because as of earlier today and officially announced just a couple hours ago, Michigan hired their head coach. Kyle Whittingham is going to be the 22nd head coach in Michigan football program history. So I wanted to quickly, kind of immediate reaction, get into some of my thoughts on the hire, my thoughts on Whittingham, kind of where the program can go with his hiring in terms of staff and roster, and what I think the positives are and what I think potential limitations or concerns might be. So let's get into it. First of all, I want to kind of get into just the whole situation, right? Because a lot has been uncovered about the process. I want to talk about Kenny Dillingham first, because that was a big thing. Like, people had assumed that Kenny Dillingham just rejected Michigan and chose to stay at ASU. That is not what happened. Apparently, he was not a candidate in Michigan's eyes at all, really. I don't think that's the right choice, but it's the truth, right? So he was never really a part of the search, right? It was Kalen DeBoer. Kalen DeBoer was the name on pretty much everyone involved that they were like, we want this guy. And obviously you can see why, right? Like, proven head coach, coached Alabama. You can see why all that would make him a top choice kind of caliber candidate, right? So they were willing to wait, right? That was what we've kind of seen, obviously, when there was no action leading up to that Alabama-Oklahoma game. They were willing to wait for Kalen DeBoer to potentially lose to Oklahoma is what they were hoping, and then try to make a move, right? And obviously that did not end up happening. Oklahoma blows a 17-0 lead. Thank you for that. And as a result, right, Kalen DeBoer is off the table, or maybe off the table, right? Probably off the table. At this point, it doesn't matter. But so that was the thing, right? They were willing to wait for Kalen DeBoer, and once Alabama wins that game, then you hit the reset button, right? Or then they hit the reset button on the search, kind of. And then you start to kind of vet. They were kind of doing background checks and maybe initial interviews with other candidates at the time, but they hadn't really narrowed down on anybody, right? So, as I said, and I actually think they were going to continue to wait for Kalen DeBoer, right? Like, even past, I think they were willing to wait into after that Rose Bowl game. They would hope that they lose Indiana, and then they'd, make a strong push for Kalen DeBoer. But what I think happened is, after those comments that Biff Poggi made on the Texas podcast with Mac Brown about players, potentially having 25 players not play in the bowl game or transfer out, and how, winning is not really an important thing. I think that just, kind of and made Michigan enter panic mode a little bit and say, okay, it's important that we make this hire now because we think we have a good candidate that would love to come here, and we don't want the entire roster to be gutted, right? So, like I said, we land on Kyle Whittingham. I think he is the best out of that kind of bunch, right? Like, if I'm not allowed to include Kenny Dillingham, which I would have gone after Kenny Dillingham, but Michigan did not, right? So if I'm not including that name, then outside of Kalen DeBoer, I think that's the next best option, right? And I think Michigan made a good hire here. It was also, I'll just touch on this, Jeff Brom was, I think I talked about this on TikTok, but he was like, there was a day where he was like, yeah, it's happening. Like, Brom is coming to Michigan. And I didn't feel great about that one. And Sam Webb was the one who was reporting about that, and he's, a well-respected Michigan insider. That obviously did not happen. It came out that Brom was apparently never a candidate, so good on his agent, I guess, for getting him. I think he does that for Brom a lot. Like, he seems to be in a lot of these searches and it ends up turning out to be nothing. So, I guess he's just got a great agent. But yeah, so we land on Kyle Whittingham. Like I said, I think he's the best out of kind of that. When you step down from your top choice DeBoer, I think he's the best out of that group. And especially the best choice for Michigan specifically. And I'll get into kind of what I mean by that. First of all, stylistically, he fits the culture, right? Or he fits the championship culture. We don't want it to fit the Sherrone Moore culture, right? Okay, let's be clear about that. He's a defensive-minded, hard-nosed coach that, kind of a no-nonsense guy, preaches physicality, but also like a super likable dude, like a super personable dude. I think players look up to him a lot. And I think, that's just kind of what Michigan needed. I know it's not like I think Kalen DeBoer would have been like a splashier, more of a flashy hire that maybe you feel like, okay, this is championship ceiling right away. I'm not saying Kyle Whittingham doesn't give you that. But I think in terms of just head coach experience and, like I said, that kind of discipline, culture, that hard-nosed style that Kyle Whittingham has, I think that was just super important to Michigan in this time. After you make that hire of Sharon Moore and things kind of go the way they did, you want to win games and you want to compete for championships, but you have to stop the bleeding a little bit, right? Like, you have to make sure that your guy is clean in all areas, right? And that's why they did such extensive background checks. That's why Jed Fish was no longer part of the search. And so I respect Michigan for that, and I think that was the right move. So obviously we have Kyle Whittingham. Let's talk a little bit about what I think the concerns are, right? I just talked about the pros. Let's talk about the concerns. One, and these aren't really concerns, but it's just kind of areas of need, I would say. One, staff hires, right? I think the success of this whole, however many years we get out of Kyle Whittingham is going to be very dependent on the staff that he builds around himself, right? And, Michigan obviously has the resources to where he can, offer a pretty penny to anyone that wants to come work for him, right? And get the right guys to work for him. But I think that's important because obviously the offense has been a struggle at Michigan, right? So you need a great offensive coordinator. You need a great offensive staff, right? If Bryce Underwood is to stay at Michigan, you need someone who can help your young quarterback succeed. And I think that's paramount. So I want to get into some of that first, kind of the assistant coach hires. First of all, let's get into Tony Alford, because Tony Alford is staying at Michigan. That's what all reports are kind of concluding, is that he has possibly been given a raise to stay at Michigan, right? Like, he is, the importance of him and what he does in recruiting and development of the running backs at Michigan is well known, right? So I think everybody, the people coming in, the administration, Ward Manual, knows how important that Tony Alford is to the program. And so he was one of the first, it was reported that players were already being told he's expected to stay, right? So that's awesome. I'm glad that Michigan can see how much Tony Alford brings. I'm glad that they prioritize that, right? This is just before he's even announced fully as the coach by Michigan. We're talking about Tony Alford saying, I love that. He's a huge part of the program, and I think he fits really well with that Kyle Whittingham physicality. That's a dangerous duo. Let's get into OC. Offensive coordinator. The name that's been kind of put out everywhere is Jason Beck, the current Utah offensive coordinator. He just got to Utah this past year. Took them on an insane turnaround. They finished 6th in total offense, 2nd in rushing. He just did an unbelievable job. He came from New Mexico with Utah's quarterback, Devin Dampier, also came from New Mexico. And, he's done a great job at developing Dampier, who is not a traditional, pocket passing quarterback. He's developed into being more of that true quarterback. Obviously, he's a great threat with his legs. But he's done a great job with the whole offense, and was really I guess he was the key to modernizing Utah's offense this year and why they had as much success as they did, right? Obviously, they lost their two big games, but they went 10-2 and put up 41 points a game. That is not to be, you can't just brush that off. That is impressive, and something that Michigan would love, a type of turnaround that Michigan would love to have, right? That's been a struggle in recent years, obviously. Next, let's get into DC. This is a name that's also been put out. Jay Hill is the BYU defensive coordinator. And this is put out because he's a long-term friend of Kyle Whittingham. He knows what Kyle's looking for in terms of defense. He understands that mentality. He's done a great job at BYU. I think we're within the top 20 to 25 range in terms of total defense, if I'm not mistaken. So he's done a great job. And I think it is for both these guys, for Beck and Jay Hill, right? I think if you're in Michigan and you have the kind of resources that you have, I think it's very enticing to these coordinators to possibly come over. And the fact that these names were given out so quickly after it was reported that Kyle Whittingham was expected to be the next coach, I think it is likely that you end up with these guys. And I hope we do, because they are great names, and absolutely I would be excited about that kind of staff. and that would fix a lot of my concern in that area, right? Offensive line coach Jim Harding. This is a must get in my eyes from Utah. He's been there, I think, 13 years. He's developed. Utah always has amazing offensive linemen. Their left tackle this year, I can't remember his name, but he's insane. Spencer Fano is going to be a top pick in this year's draft at right tackle. He's a beast. So he knows what he's doing. He's experienced and, a good recruiter, right? Like, this is kind of what I'll get into about recruiting a little bit after the coaching hire segment, but he just signed a 5-star offensive tackle too. Like, that's not something you see at Utah happen very much, right? And obviously he knows what he's doing. I don't hate Grant Newsome either. I think he's an up-and-coming coach that will be a good offensive line coach, but I think this is just to get Jim Harding, right? He has Michigan ties too. I think he coached high school football in Troy, Michigan, I think. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I know he has like Midwest and Michigan ties. This is it'd be too good of an opportunity. You got it. You got to try to bring him on board. So I hope we get that one. And then last one I just have on here is Freddie Whittingham. So I think it's the brother of Kyle Whittingham, tight ends coach at Utah. I believe it was already reported that he's going to be joining the staff at Michigan. So just a good one to note there. So like I said, obviously Kyle Whittingham fits the culture. He's that kind of that disciplined type of coach that you're looking for, right? After the disaster with Sharon Moore, you're looking to kind of right the ship. Obviously you want to win, but you want to avoid the circus that Michigan has been these past few off seasons, right? That's a main thing. You got to bring stability back to the program, and Kyle Whittingham is that. Like, he's the definition of that. I saw that tweet earlier that he's like on Instagram. He follows 5 women total, and I think he's like related to all of them. It's like awesome. Like, let's go. Complete opposite of Sharon Moore. We like get as far away from that as you can, and I think that was part of Michigan's mindset when making this hire. All right, so let's talk about kind of my other concern. And this isn't really, like I said, these aren't like concerns like, this is something that Kyle Whittingham just doesn't do, right? You haven't seen it. You haven't seen Kyle Whittingham with the type of resources that Michigan has. You've seen him recruiting at Utah, which is not an easy place to recruit to, especially in the NIL era when players are getting offered a lot of money to go other places, right? It's hard to get players to come to Salt Lake City, Utah for less money. Like, I don't know a lot of 18-year-olds that want to move their life to Salt Lake City to play football. Let's just be honest, right? So not really concerned, but like recruiting, right? One, he's 66, and the reason I don't say that as a concern on its own is because he's like a young 66. He's super in shape. He's super like healthy, and he acts much younger than he is. And I just think that's a little overblown anyway, right? Like, Nick Saban won a national title at age 68 or 69. Kurt Cignetti, who everyone would agree is like a top 3 coach in college football right now, is 64, I think. So that's not really a concern to me in terms of just age, in general. But in terms of relatability to players, in terms of recruiting, that's absolutely a part of it, right? Like, I want to make sure that our coaches feel like that our players or possible, recruits feel like Kyle Whittingham is someone they can trust, they can talk to, someone they want to go play for, someone they can relate to, right? So that's kind of my concern there. And just in terms of like the area, right? He's been at Utah for a long time. He's never really been in the Midwest. Can he kind of keep the same recruiting pipeline that Michigan has had, right? Like, they recruit a lot from the Midwest, obviously, but also the DMV area. They recruit a ton of kids from Virginia. They recruit kids from Texas and the South. They recruit a lot of kids from Georgia these past few years. So that, I would say, is my other concern, right? That's what you want to make sure. You want to make sure he has like a good GM in place. I don't know what the deal is with that. I know some rumors have been going around about Courtney Morgan potentially being targeted there. That would be amazing, but that's not concrete, so I'm not even going to get into that too much. But a Sean McGee even is a great general manager, and I think if you could just keep that same infrastructure, right? Like, this is the one thing I'll say, and I know that's kind of the main concern with Kyle Whittingham, right? Like, he hasn't recruited at a high level. Do you think that these past 2 classes, right? Michigan had the 2025 class and the 2026 class were both top 10 recruiting classes. And do you think that those kids came to Michigan because they were just dying to play for Sharon Moore? They weren't. that had very little to do with it. And I like, he's a young guy, and I'm sure they liked him, right? Like in the recruiting process, I'm sure he's relatable to them. But you come for the logo, you come to play for the Block M, you come to play at a place like Michigan, you come to play in the Big House, and you come to play when NIL resources are obviously abundant at Michigan, and kids can make a ton of money by playing here, right? That's today's age. None of that is going away, right? None of that infrastructure is going away, but you have to have a coach that prioritizes it, right? You have to have a coach that's bought in, right? So that would be my only concern. But I think that they wouldn't. I don't think they would have hired Kyle Whittingham if they hadn't had conversations about that, right? Like, they want to stay recruiting at an elite level, and obviously there's a lot of donors that back the football program, right? I feel confident that he will be able to translate to the recruiting expectation that a Michigan has, right? And just because he hasn't done it, because he hasn't had the resources to do it, really doesn't mean he can't. And even in this past cycle, I think that offensive tackle I already talked about. I think there was like a top 100 receiver. I have seen that he has been kind of embracing NIL, so I think that could be something that he does really well at Michigan, right? It's just kind of wait and see. So that's kind of all I have in terms of initial thoughts. I want to know what you guys think, Michigan fans and non-Michigan fans. What do you think about the hire? Like I said, I'm excited about it. I think this is, as far as our circumstances go with this hire, I think this is a great guy to land on, right? And you're not going to have Kyle Whittingham for 15 years, just because of how old he is. But it's going to hopefully bring you back to that playoff standard and restore some stability into the program that's much needed at this point, to where that next guy is, maybe you do go for an up-and-comer that you feel good about, right? Like, Kenny Dillingham's still going to be coaching, right? That's all I'm saying. So when Kyle Whittingham is gone, bring me Dilly. That's my vote. I'm calling it 5 years in advance or whenever that is. But let me know. I want to hear your guys' thoughts. As always, hit the like button, subscribe, follow us over on Twitter at StepBros_pod, and on TikTok. We just made a TikTok recently at StepBrothersPodcast 1. So at StepBrothersPodcast 1. As always, we appreciate the support that we've been getting. Appreciate, I love talking to all types of people on social media. It's been fun so far. So let me know your thoughts, and go Blue.